Thank you, CMO. Thank you, Minister. Before I start, let me say that our frontline workers, our healthcare providers, our nurses, our doctors, they are taking on now a Herculean task. Some of them are very frustrated, tired, and as we have been monitoring and we have received the reports, the situation for many can only be described as scary, even to their own personal health. And we don't want that situation to evolve into the circumstances where our healthcare professionals feel that they have to withdraw their service or not give their full service. Though that is not something that we contemplate, because we know our healthcare workers are professional and they're giving their best. But if they perceive that even with the clear and present danger in front of us, that our citizens are not acting responsibly, it can lead to a very high level of frustration. So I appeal to our citizens to understand the pressures that our healthcare workers and our doctors are under. Many of them are working long hours under less than reasonable conditions. And so I make that appeal. I know most Jamaicans would have already been mentally prepared for tougher measures, tighter restrictions. The government has been taking a very gradual approach, knowing the society that we have, that many persons live day to day, many persons have no savings, and you can't disrupt plans without giving at least some notice. So for the last 3 press conferences, we have been explaining to the country that you will see the numbers, you will see the outcome, and if the numbers are not improving, if the outcomes seem to be worse than expected, then we will have to tighten measures. So we are here now again, and I don't think there's any surprise. After careful consideration by the Cabinet and the presentation of the CMO, which you have just seen, it was decided that we have to prevent further transmission. And the most effective way of slowing down transmission is to have a complete halt at a point, stop movement. That's what it comes down to simply. So even though I'm going to announce a series of measures, what I want you to take away from these measures, if you don't have to move, stand at your yard, stay home. Stay put, stay safe, shelter in place, whatever you want to describe it as. If you don't have to move in this period, don't move. Stay within your household. Stay in groupings that you know. As I said earlier in my presentation, there are many persons who believe this is not going to affect me. Many of the persons who are in hospital now, that's what they thought. That's exactly what they thought. And we are at the point where we don't have enough beds. We don't want to get to the point where we just can't take anyone else in the hospital, or someone dies because they were deprived of a service because we have had to take a doctor and put them on the COVID ward, or take a bed from another ward to put it on the COVID ward. We're trying to avoid that. So we have established that there will be 7 no movement days. And these will be Sunday, August the 22nd, Monday, August the 23rd, Tuesday, August the 24th, Sunday, August the 29th, Monday, August 30th, Tuesday, August 31st, and Sunday, September 5th. So we want to digest that a bit. No movement days means just that. On those days, the curfew hour would be 24 hours. The entire day, no movement on that day for those 7 days. And let me repeat. So this coming Sunday, the 22nd, no movement on that day. Stay home, get some rest, spend it with your family, call up your family members in the country, overseas, do some work around your yard. If you find something to occupy your time at home. Worship online. On Monday, August the 23rd, no movement day. Tuesday, August 24th, no movement day. PS is not a holiday. No movement on that day. But it doesn't mean that you should not be working from home. So we are expecting you, as many of you who can work from home, to continue to be productive, to do your work at home. Then the following Sunday, August the 29th, that's a no movement day. The following Monday, after that Sunday, no movement day, and that would be August 30th. And then Tuesday, August the 31st, that's another no movement day. And then Sunday, the 5th of September, no movement day. The objective is that we are giving the Ministry of Health two periods of no movement that will effectively break the transmission of the virus. Now, this is what we hope will happen. But if people decide that they're not going to follow the advice and direction of the government and decide that they're going to go about their business, and all of this would be in vain. Worst of all, it would be in vain for those who follow the orders, because they would have made the sacrifice for it only to be destroyed by those who don't follow. So this works if everyone cooperates, and I'm appealing for everyone to make these no movement days a success. But we know our Jamaican family. We know that there are some people who don't care and who say it don't affect them. So, very selfishly, they will be going about their own business. For them, the police will be on the road, and they have been given clear instructions to enforce these no movement days. Now, the normal curfew hours, which would then apply to the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday following these no movement days, will be 7 p.m. nightly until 5 a.m. the following morning on days other than no movement days, except Saturday, which will be at 6 p.m. I hope I'm clear with that. So the days following the no movement days, which would be the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, would be 7, and then the Saturday would be 6, which is what obtains now. However, to allow persons to prepare for the 3 consecutive no movement days on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, that is from August 22nd to 24, we will start the curfew later tomorrow, Friday, August 20th, and Saturday, August 21. So we understand that the lead time is short, and when we tighten the hours, as would be expected, everyone is going to shop in a precautionary way. Let me get an extra this and an extra that, and let me go to the supermarket, even if I don't have to, just to be sure. And so you will have some congestion on the road as everybody tries to get home or try to get the last minute supplies. So we have considered that, and we have extended, but just for this Friday and Saturday, we have extended the hours to allow persons to be able to stock up for the no movement days. So tomorrow, Friday, August 20th, the curfew will begin at 9 p.m. And on Saturday, August 21st, the curfew will begin at 8 p.m. So to be clear, what this means, on Saturday, August 21st, the curfew will begin at 8 p.m. and continue through the rest of Saturday, the entire day on Sunday, Monday and Tuesday, and end at 5 a.m. on Wednesday, August 25th. This will be repeated the following week, starting at 6 p.m. now on Saturday, August 28th. Also, to allow persons to prepare for the 3 consecutive no movement days, tomorrow, Friday, August 20th, and on Friday, August 27th, workplaces, businesses will be required to close at midday. Our workplaces or businesses will, there are some workplaces and businesses, that will not have to close at midday, and these are the courts. They can remain open to their normal working hours. Establishments providing the following services: security services, financial services, our banks and other such services, transportation services, obviously health services, including pharmacies, optical and dental establishments, the National Water Commission, the JPS, oil refining, loading, distribution, and retail of petroleum, our gas stations and so forth. They will remain to their normal opening hours within, of course, for gas stations within the curfew hours. Public works and sanitation, firefighting, civil aviation, telecommunications, and obviously food. Supermarkets and wholesale stores and corner shops, they can remain open until the curfew hour. The loading and unloading of ships, storage and delivery of goods and docks, wharves, warehouses, etc., those are critical to the continuation of the supply chain. And those critical to the operations of the government, including the TAJ, for those who don't know, the tax authority, the Jamaica Customs, PICA, the Jamaica Printing Services, etc. Obviously, funeral homes would remain open, farm stores, and the BPO sector. Now, despite the extended curfew hours, we want the vaccination program. This is very important. Despite the no movement days and the extended curfews, we want the vaccination program to continue. Certain vaccination sites will remain open during curfew hours and on no movement days. Persons with appointments to receive a vaccine will be allowed to do so during curfew hours. Persons will be required to present evidence of the appointment. They can show their text message if they get one, or the email. If they're going for their second shot, they can show that their vaccination card. Obviously, this is not a wholesale extension. Your direction of travel must be going to a site. The police will know where the sites are, obviously. And you can't tell the officer at 8 p.m. that you're going to the vaccination site that closes at 4. All students who will be going to schools to get vaccinated on no movement days should have the messages that their schools would have sent them and their school IDs as proof that they're going to be vaccinated. So to be clear, on no movement days, persons will be allowed to seek urgent medical attention, and those who have overseas travel or are coming into the country can make their way to and from the airport. Essential services will still be operational, and in this group, I would include our fisher folk, our farmers, persons at critical factories, and the BPOs, and those involved in the maintenance of infrastructure of the financial services, and, of course, our friends in the media. But I remind those persons employed to essential services who must move on the no-movement days to ensure that you have on your person your work ID to present to the police. And even in this group, those persons who can work from home should do so and only travel if necessary. And a very important point, those persons who are allowed to move on no-movement days must be moving for the purpose for which the exemption was granted, for the purpose of their job. So you can't be heading in the direction of a beach and saying you are a, and by the way, don't tell the policeman that you're a lifeguard, because the beaches are closed. So it is for the purpose of your work. Last time I was asked a question about the ENDS program. As a reminder, ENDS, that is the e-commerce national delivery system. This has been going very well. We have over 50 registered online vendors, businesses, and delivery operators registered on the ENDS system will be able to operate after curfew until midnight on no-movement days. Work from home. Again, this question came up, and I had mentioned that we will undertake a review of this work-from-home policy. But in the interim, the existing work-from-home directive in the public sector is being extended until September 7th, 2021. Permanent secretaries and heads of agencies are directed to strictly ensure that only persons who work in critical service delivery and the nature of the work requires that the job functions be performed at the physical location at the office. For the private sector, I'm issuing a strong appeal to employers to ensure only persons who cannot work from home to come to the workplace. And obviously, this would be during the movement days. Places of worship. On Sunday, August 29 and Sunday, September 5th, places of worship will be allowed to have 20 persons physically present in the church. Persons who leave home on these days, these 2 Sundays, will have to carry on them their ID, obviously. But you would recall in a previous order that we had gazetted a form which we agreed with the churches, which would have the names of the persons who are allowed to travel during the curfew hours to go to church in order to allow for the transmission of online services. And so we will return to that model. The churches are already familiar with it. We weren't able to give the churches the usual notice to the various church bodies, and we apologize for that, but because we had to take these measures. But what we decided to do was to ensure that the measures that we're putting in place are not new or unfamiliar. So this is a measure that the churches would be familiar with. Please note, however, that the Sunday movement for worshippers will not be allowed for this Sunday. So this Sunday, the first of the no movement days, it will be a strict no movement day. So the measure of the gazetted form will not apply on this Sunday, and we are not expecting that there would be any persons traveling at that point. Now, gathering limit. The general public gathering limit remains now at 10. People get confused sometimes, what is the gathering limit? For things that are not necessarily considered events, organized events, no more than 10 persons should be in a group in close proximity with each other. And that's usually probably the size of a household or so. But if you go to the bus stop and you see more than 10 persons there. In your mind, as a person who is conscious about what is happening, you should put some distance between yourself and that group of 10. That's the idea. Because the larger the group in close proximity, the higher the risk of transmission. And that's why when the risk of transmission is high, then we reduce the numbers that are gathering. This is a very useful guide for you as a citizen. That in addition to wearing your mask, in addition to maintaining your 6 feet apart, and in addition to sanitizing your hands, also pay attention to the number of persons gathered. Obviously, if you're going onto a bus, there might be more persons on the bus. But again, you take your precaution. If you're going into a room, you want to make sure no more than 10 persons. And that's the gathering rule. And it is very limited now because the transmission rate is high. For places of worship, no more than 20 persons, as we have said, should be within the place of worship. Of course, no crusades, conferences, and conventions, etc., will be permitted. No more than 20 persons will be permitted to physically attend a wedding. Again, I apologize to all those who would have made plans. Some persons have said thank you, though. Persons physically attending annual or extraordinary general meetings will be restricted to 20 persons. Of course, no physical attendance at any event hosted by the government will be permitted, and this will start as of next Wednesday. In terms of funeral services, no funeral services will be allowed during the period August 25th to September 7th, 2021. You'll recall that we had allowed funeral services in the church. We're going to restrict that now, so there will be no funeral services in the church. We're not going to go to the extreme that we had to do in March, where we had prohibited burials. So burials between August 25th and September 7th, 2021 will be allowed, but a maximum of 15 persons will be allowed at the burial, including mourners, officiating clergy, grave diggers, and undertakers. You will recall that we had increased that number to 30. We're reducing it now to 15. As a reminder, burials will be allowed only on Mondays to Fridays, and just to be clear, excluding no movement days. So technically, you could only have funerals between this period on Wednesday to Friday. And again, for those who have made plans, we apologize and we ask you to just bear with us. And of course, the funerals are allowed between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. And the time for each burial, is 30 minutes. So, in conclusion, the tighter measures we have introduced are necessary because of our rising case numbers and hospitalizations, and these are beyond the capacity of the health system to manage. I urge all Jamaicans to cooperate and to do their part. We all need to work together as one family to get this third wave under control so that we can start the reopening of our schools. I have to say a few words on the vaccines. There was a point in time when we didn't have the vaccines. And, the question was, when are we going to get the vaccines? No, we have answered that question. We have sufficient vaccines, and we have established a flow to replenish the stock of vaccines. So the vaccine stock is not a challenge at this moment. What is appearing to be a challenge is the hesitancy in taking the vaccine, and I can deal with hesitancy, but what I can't deal with is reluctance. So you have an element of the population that is hesitant. They are in two minds. They will probably take it. The more information they get, the more Minister Tufton puts out ads, and we include all the stakeholders. And every time I get in front of a mic, I speak about taking the vaccine. So I'm confident that for those persons who are skeptical, who are unsure, but reasonable-minded, that our reasoning with them will work. There is, however, a very hardened element of our society that is absolutely reluctant and determined not to take the vaccines. And I've come to that conclusion because of some interactions that I've had with people who I expect to know better, and with some persons that are unfortunately misled. And when I relate to them stories of persons who were equally hesitant and reluctant, who had the opportunity, Madam Attorney General, to take the vaccine and did not take the vaccine and are now critical in ICU, or who have unfortunately perished. The unquestioned fact is that 99% of those persons were occupying those 700 beds. We are now over 700 persons in intake in hospitals. They were not vaccinated. Nobody's saying that you may not get ill if you are vaccinated, you may not contract the disease. That's not what the science is saying. What the science is clearly saying is that the risk of an adverse or fatal event is very low. That's what the science is saying. So I would urge you, for your sake, and I know that in many households in Jamaica, you know, we are hearing of this conversation between our, household support, our helpers and gardeners and so forth, who don't want to take the vaccine. And, the householders are saying, please take the vaccine, and that's a running debate. Same debate is going on between employers and employees. And it will go on for a while, obviously. It will go on for a while. I'm hoping that people would not have to make the decision because of fatal events. In other words, someone close to you who didn't take the vaccine has died, and then you are going to run to try and get the vaccine. That is why, as human beings, we have the ability of reason and perception, that we don't have to wait until a mistake is made before we decide to do the right thing. We can use our judgment and reason. I'm very encouraged by the churches and other stakeholders that I have seen come out in support of the vaccine, and I encourage more church leaders who are very influential to speak to their flock frankly about taking the vaccine. I would urge them to, and I use this platform to urge our church leaders. Our entertainers are probably the most influential and the broadest section of our society. And I would urge more entertainers to come out and speak up about taking the vaccines. I know many have taken because they need to travel, they need to go overseas. So, please, we need your voice now on the national stage to encourage your fans and your supporters that the only way we're going to safely get back to having our gatherings and entertainment events and so forth is if we get those persons vaccinated. I do intend to write to the leader of the opposition to invite him to participate on a unified national campaign for vaccinations. I've taken note that already Minister Tufton and Dr. Maurice Guy have started that process, but we're going to expand it. We are calling upon all the MPs and caretakers and councillors and councillor caretakers. You know, you have an army of Jamaicans that follow you, and it is now time to call upon them to get vaccinated. This is a national effort, and we need all hands on deck. That's the only way we're going to prevent me having to come here every 2 weeks to say tighter measures. I know you're tired of it. I'm tired of it as well. But, you know, if I don't do it, more people are going to die. That's just the reality. And if you want the economy to reopen and you want to be able to get back to your normal life, the pathway, only sustainable pathway, is to take the vaccines. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We will now take a few questions from members of the media. I do see a very full room, and we will go through and ensure that we explain the measures. Already, Prime Minister, as we await some members of the media, of course, we would have done the tests already. We ask that you keep in mind that others may have questions, and you could limit it to 2 in the first instance. But already on social media, just ahead of going to Mr. Damien Mitchell from the Gleaner Company, persons want clarification concerning whether or not pharmacies will be part of the no movement days in terms of will they be able to be open, as well as hotel workers and those who have hotel bookings, and finally those who enjoy bird shooting.
These measures are not new. They are drawn from previous orders. So in previous orders, pharmacies and medical offices, hospitals and so forth were allowed to be open during the curfew hours. Yes, for hotels where workers have to serve guests and so forth, yes, they are allowed to move during curfew hours. But remember now, for the purpose. So if you're a hotel worker, you have to be heading to the hotel. You have to show your license, your ID and so forth. For bird shooters, no special provisions have been made. If you can get a shooting within the period, you know, what we would say to you is follow the protocols. Try not to have more than 10 persons in your group around you, and you know, head back to your shelter as soon as you're finished with your activity.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now to Mr. Mitchell from the Gleaner. Damon.
Thank you, Naomi. Prime Minister, I have 2 questions for you. What's the rationale behind no movement days, Sundays to Tuesdays, as opposed to Fridays to Sundays?
A good question. The real concern is the stocking day. So you would remember that when we did the lockdowns in Portmore, what we learned from that is that you have to give days to allow businesses to stock and persons to shop. And the normal shopping day is usually a Friday and a Saturday. And that's why we decided that we would go Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, rather than take out the weekend, which is a shopping and a stocking period.
Well, your health minister has conceded that there were inadequate personnel to monitor the Dream Weekend Party series in a parish that had been recording the highest rate of infections. Why then was a permit granted for the Dream Weekend Party series?
So I didn't hear Minister Tufton's statement on that, but I take what you have said. You will recall that when the call, almost a national call, chorus for the reopening of events, not just entertainment, because it's not just parties that happen, it was events. So that national choir for the reopening of the economy that sang very loudly, that from all quarters was a loud choir with many participants. Of course, a lot of them are silent now. However, in keeping with our policy and principle that once we give approvals, which we did for a period starting, I believe it was the 1st of July, was it, remind me, Minister, 1st of July to the 10th of August. And during that period of time, we approved a certain number of events. I want to be clear because I've seen someone who should know better saying that, you know, we are catering for the big man. That's why we gave approval for large events, not acknowledging the fact that we gave approvals as well for small events. And those events, we routinely monitor them, and I know from the report that Minister Mackenzie would have given that there were over 800 small events with 100 persons or less, over 800. We had how many large events? 20 were approved. And so once we gave that period that we were approving small and large events and the approvals were granted, we thought it best not to withdraw the approvals. However, you will acknowledge, Damien, that we reduced the parameters in which they could operate, meaning that the curfews were set at 11 o'clock. We reduced them right down to, I believe, 7, and on weekends they went down to 3 or 2 o'clock. I think it was 3 o'clock. So we did reduce the parameters in which they could operate without withdrawing the approvals that we had given, because then you would have the exposure of people putting out significant outlay of capital and so forth. So we had to bear all kinds of those considerations. So we did put in place the measures to restrict the events, reduce the numbers. As I said, I can't comment on what Minister Tufton said. I didn't hear Minister Tufton's statement, but I do know that there was monitoring because we received the reports about and Minister Mackenzie as well would have given some reports about the adherence to protocols, etc. So, you know, we did not pull the plug on any of the events that we approved. Some, however, did not go ahead because the reduction in the operating parameters would not have made it feasible. So the government took actions to protect the public by reducing the operating parameters.
Thank you, sir. As you can imagine, there are several persons in the general public as well as those in the media who have questions. Ahead of naming our next media rep who will ask a question, there are several persons on social media who are asking concerning airport pickup in terms of passing, supermarket stock-up days within the period, as well as those with hotel stays. And I'm just trying to, do a quick synopsis. Persons who need to do COVID tests during no movement days.
So if you have airport plans, you are allowed to go to the airport to pick up the passenger and return home. If you are leaving the island, you are allowed to be dropped off at the airport and catch your flight. The airports will still be open and operational. If you're coming in, you're allowed to come in and get a taxi to go where you're going. And that's easily established if you're traveling. Good question about getting your test. My encouragement to you would be to do it on the movement days. If you have to do it on a period where you're leaving on a no movement day and you need to do your test before it falls within that, then that could be considered and should be considered as paying attention to a medical need. So you would be captured under that. Of course, if you are stopped, you would have to explain to the officer that you are heading in that direction. That is what the purpose of your travel is. And it's easy to show proof of that. Obviously, you're coming back. You can show that you have you're doing your test and so forth. So it's accounted for.
All right, thank you, sir. Let's go over to the media. Again, I do have some from several business persons, but I'll just hand over to the media. Mrs. Dion Jackson-Miller from RJR, who has a question.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I know that IGL, Mr. Prime Minister, had said they upgraded their capacity to provide medical oxygen after the second wave, but with the numbers we're seeing and the increased numbers and the projections as to where we're headed with these numbers and hospitalizations, can you update us on the current capacity, whether the need is being met, and what are the projections going forward if the numbers continue to increase? That's one. And my second question has to do with the lockdowns. One of the problems that we've seen whenever the restrictions are tightened is that you have more crowding in the shops and the supermarkets. What we saw in St. Catherine after a lockdown of several days is that you then have crowds rushing out on the first movement day, and we can predict that's going to be happening on Wednesday. Might it not be counterproductive to lock down, especially the supermarkets and pharmacies because of this problem of the crowding when people are allowed to go?
Dion, let me answer your second question, and then I'll ask Minister Tufton or the CMO to answer the question regarding the oxygen. My information is as your preamble suggested. Now, regarding the oxygen, now, we did give consideration, Dion, to the issue of congestion. We came down on the point that once people are able to plan ahead, and this is what we are hoping that they would be able to do now, plan ahead, that the congestion might be reduced, because a part of the congestion is when a measure is new and there is fearfulness and uncertainty. So which is why we have increased the movement and travel times, reduced the work times on the Friday and on the Saturday coming. And the wise advice to Jamaican citizens is that if you have to then stock up for the following 3 lockdown days, then you would do it on the Wednesday, Thursday, and on the Friday. So you spread out your restocking days on the movement days to come. So there is no need for any panic on the part of citizens to try and rush and get stuff. There is absolutely no need for that. We should just plan our shopping and stocking needs in a wise manner. And I believe that we would have given sufficient time for persons to be able to do that. Take advantage, Dion, of online services for those of us who can, and certainly that could help. And there's a growing number of online services. But it doesn't take away from your point, Dion, that there will be, and we know, some crowding that is going to take place. But I think the measure that, as we have it, is the best way to do it. Thank you, Dion. CMO.
Hi, good evening, Dion. Thanks for your question. Yeah, this is one of our real cause of concern, because IGL would have increased their capacity in order to be able to comfortably meet the demand that we had in March, April, and just going above that, they're able to go. Right now, at the present time, we don't have a problem, because I've been checking with the hospitals and they have been working fervently. We've gotten a lot of new cylinders, and IGL has been filling those cylinders. However, if we continue along this trend, and if we are approaching 1,000 persons in bed for COVID, and we have a good number of these persons being severely ill, it means especially that we will have patients on high-flow nasal oxygen that requires a considerable amount of oxygen to keep that going. So we are in a danger period, and we cannot afford to go more than where we are in terms of admissions, and we need to get those admissions down, because if we are approaching 1,000, we're going to be in problems, and we really don't want to get there.
Thank you, CMO. Thank you, Mrs. Jackson-Miller. Let's, Prime Minister, I did say so many business persons as well have questions. Have one here concerning, will factories be allowed to remain open, especially those who have orders for hospital beds, and also for the construction sector, especially for projects on the North Coast regarding hotel constructions and other residential areas?
Very good questions. Just to allay those fears, we've been doing this now for some time. This is what, the ninth order, the ninth order for this year. So we have developed a set of measures that we can just literally cut and paste because they're very well developed, evolved measures. So yes, factories are allowed and we specify them. Construction, most definitely. But again, they have to follow the protocols. So construction sites are allowed to continue. Their workers must move with ID, and they must be going to the site. And don't say that you're going to a construction site and you're heading to a bar or somewhere. It's home to construction site.
Thank you, sir. Let's go over to Ms. Stevie Ann Simmons of Nationwide Radio. Stevie?
Hi, good evening. I have about 3 or 2 questions. One, Prime Minister, is there any plans by the government or any encouragement to the private sector to pay people earlier this weekend to facilitate people who want to stack up for the lockdown or the no movement days? 2, it seems to me, well, it appears more and more that a main cause of the vaccine hesitancy or the reluctance in people taking the vaccine is people's limited or lack of trust in the government. So is there anything that we can do to counter that in the government and in politicians on a whole? So what are the plans to counter that? And 3, are you confident in the capacity of the security forces to enforce these no movement days?
So let's start with the first question. It's a good suggestion. Government obviously can't mandate the private sector to pay early. I will have a word with our PSs and the Ministry of Finance to see whether or not that can be facilitated. But it's a little bit too late now for us to mobilize that. In future, we will note that. My team is looking at that. If we're going to do that and it falls just before a payday, then that's something that for government we would look at. There's nothing I could do other than to urge the private sector, and that's up to them totally. As it relates to your last question was about trust. Listen, I'm the first to say, and I've said it in my public presentations in Parliament and other places, that there is a low trust environment in Jamaica. Low trust, that's just the reality, which makes it very difficult to implement public policy. Because in a low trust environment, you have to depend on enforcement rather than people complying. And so what this government has done at all times is to be open and transparent about whatever we're doing. The public can't say that they have never been updated or don't know or something is done clandestinely. We make ourselves open to review. So there are many independent bodies that review the government. When there are issues, we own up to it and we take action. And we try to deliver the best results that we can. And I think any objective viewer of this administration would say that we have performed creditably given the circumstances, both those within our control and those outside of our control. And we are always endeavoring, I'm not saying we're perfect, but we're always endeavoring to meet the public's expectations. It's not all the time that it happens. And I would not venture to say that every member of this administration shares that view. There are those who still feel that, they are not accountable to the public. But generally, certainly the stance that I have taken is to make the government be accountable to the public, and that will build public trust. I don't think that there is any citizen that could say they are fearful of the government or the government is acting in a way that is inimical to their interest. Though there have been many protests and many persons who are trying to stir up class war and civil strife and all kinds of issues. But no one can say that the government has reacted in a manner that is inimical to the rights and welfare of the citizen. We act on behalf of the citizen, and we are here to serve the public, and that's what we do. It is going to take decades to convince the public of this, and I'm satisfied that it is not something that is going to happen overnight, that we will be able to stand there and say to our public, take the vaccine, and they will listen to us. That's not going to happen right now. That, however, doesn't mean that we mustn't stand here and say it. And the instruction that has been given to all our ministers is that we must be ambassadors and continue to appeal to the people, reason with the people, explain to the people. It's a long, tedious process, but be assured, Stevie, and we are not in any way overwhelmed or bewildered. We are going to continue to reason with the Jamaican people, and we are confident that it might take some time, but eventually people will come on board and take the vaccine. As it relates to my confidence in the security forces to enforce the lockdowns, you would agree, and if you go back on your own reports and review them, that on previous no-movement days when we have implemented them, we have had great success. And the police have been out in their numbers and have worked to ensure that there is a high level of compliance and professional and respectful enforcement of the law to our citizens.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Two quick ones from social media before we go back to the media. We'll welcome Corey Robinson from the Gleaner once we do that. Again, seeking clarification for remittance agencies being open on no movement days.
They are considered under institution, so yes.
On no movement days, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Also, from the sporting fraternity, what of the Jamaica match on the 5th of September? Will they be allowed to be moving?
That's a question I'd have to get back to you on. Minister, you're here. You want to give an opinion on it? Minister Mackenzie? Or you want to? We'll discuss it.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Let's go to Corey Robinson of the Gleaner. Corey, hello.
Yes, good night, Mr. Prime Minister and colleagues. My question is this. When the vaccine just came out, there was a list of priority persons, healthcare workers, the members of the security forces, etc. I'm just wondering, now that the hospital, we've reached at this stage with the hospitals at the capacity, will there be a list of priority persons for treatment and for ventilators? Second question, Minister, what is the scientific explanation for the spread in the West? If not for Dream Weekend and these other parties that are causing a controversy, what is the scientific explanation for the spread and the spike that we're seeing in the western end of the island? And the third and final question is, based on the numbers that you released from in regards to the Delta variant, right, we're seeing that the virus is coming from overseas. Forgive me, but I don't recall you mentioning or speaking to anything relating to the borders or protection of our borders. Can you speak to that really? What is there in place, or what do you plan to do as it relates to securing our borders from persons coming into the island with the virus? Thank you.
Sorry, just remind me of your first question was your
All right, so the first question is in regards to priority. You mentioned
the priority list.
For the vaccination.
I'm not going to pretend to be able to answer that question, so I'll ask the CMO, except to say that in these matters, once it comes to care, then only the standard medical triage would apply, but there wouldn't be any predetermined priority list. That would be problematic. The medical professional would have to look on a case-by-case and triage, but it couldn't be that there is a predetermined priority list. So I suspect I could say that the CMO would be satisfied with that answer, that we wouldn't give up a predetermined priority list for persons to get access to oxygen and so forth. No. So I don't know, Madam AG, if I should repeat that. So no, I won't repeat that point. But I mean, there are some people who are saying that people who are careful and abiding by the law should be given priority in the hospital if they were to. That obviously, you know, the medical professionals at the point would make their triage determination, because it would have to be what other patients they have to treat and so forth. So no, the answer to that is no. And your last question is, what would be the scientific explanation? I don't have that. I would have to ask the Ministry of Health. I would only say that the western end of the island, Westmoreland, is not the only parish. We are also seeing a spike in Manchester, which is just as significant as in Westmoreland, and I am told in St. Anne as well. I think we should be careful. Nobody is saying that the events that were held did not contribute to the spike. I think we should just put that on the table. When we allowed it, it was with that caveat, with that understanding that if we allowed events, there will be a spike. So it is an academic discussion now to, you know, try and ascribe. From a scientific point of view, we would want to know, but from a policy perspective, once we allowed events, this will be the result. And the government was quite clear. We made that very public, right? But again, when we are acting in the public policy space, government has to pay attention to not just the medical science, but also to the social science as well. There was a feeling in the society that the society needed a break. And there are many persons, some of you probably forget that there were organized protests in Montego Bay, free up the sector. We quickly forget those things. But we are a government that listens to the people. And we are now putting in place the measures, as we had always said we would have to do, to bring the situation back under control. There is no sector in the society that could fairly say that in the management of the pandemic, the government did not give them an opportunity to earn their bread and exercise their livelihood, and at the same time, try to be safe.
Thank you, Prime Minister. For those who are asking online again concerning the hotel reservations, the Prime Minister did allude to the fact that once you have your valid explanation, the police will be able to grant you passage. So for those who have asked about...
Be clear.
Yes.
So there are some movements which we have to allow. You know, we have to allow movement to keep our power plants, our water, our public sanitation going. If you had made plans to travel in and out of the country, you can move from the point of entry or departure to your home. So the idea behind those movements is that you are not moving to interact with any grouping of persons other than leaving the point of entry and exit and heading to your home. If you have to seek medical attention, and we include in that if you have to go and get your vaccine or get your test, you are allowed to move and do that and head back home. Those are allowed. And the persons who are transporting you.
Yes.
Right? So that's clear. So if you had a hotel reservation and you're moving from the airport to your hotel, fine, go there, because that is allowed. But if you are in Jamaica and you have a hotel reservation, then you should move to the hotel on the movement day. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So you don't use the no movement day to go and get your vacation.
Thank you, sir. Again, just before I head to Mr. Jovan Johnson from the Gleaner, who has a question, bankers are also asking, just to be clear, sir, on no movement days, will they be able to be open? on no movement days.
So on no movement days, we are not expecting that banks will be open and other such establishments. Those are not required to be open. However, if, for example, and we had to contemplate this in Portmore, you need to get some cash and you have to go to an ATM, or you have to go to the remittance, right? We would make some exemptions for that, so you could go and get your medicine and so forth. So those we expect to be open, the ATM, and we could, make the exemptions for the remittance. You get your little money and then you go and do what you have to do if you have to go to a pharmacy or go to a doctor. But that's it. We would expect all other businesses to remain closed.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Johnson, good evening.
Thank you, Naomi. Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. I have two questions. Mr. Prime Minister, at a previous update, you said mandatory vaccination for key groups was not being pursued. Today, the Education Minister said students for face-to-face teaching will be required to vaccinate. Has the government's position changed? Has it revised its position? And if not, why not, in light of the current situation and the projections? And question two, why are students for face-to-face being required to be vaccinated, but not teachers?
It's a very good question, Jovan, and I'm glad you raised the issue, because when I spoke about vaccination, I was very clear in using the term mandatory. Now, I have still yet not worked out in my mind how you can force somebody, an adult, to take a vaccine. We have on our books, our laws allow for a child who is under the legal guardianship of a parent, and I believe the age is up to 12 years old, CMO, if my recollection of it, to take the compulsory vaccination. Younger, right. So, you can hold the baby normally the mothers would hold them and the doctor just do a quick thing. I don't see you can do that to an adult. So I'm not certain about this business of mandatory. Of course, the law can mandate. We have not explored whether or not that would be constitutional in our arrangement. I'm certain that the legal debate, Jovan, could come up with both sides of the argument within our Constitution, and a court would decide. And I've read the editorial. I can very well see that there are solid arguments on the side of mandatory vaccination, and there are also some solid arguments against. The issue for the government is it worth the distraction at this time? And do we tie up our resources? Because remember now, Jovan, between everything that we have to do to then, plunge the Attorney General's office to be distracted from the other things to go into that debate is something that I have to make a calculation on and the efficient use of our resources. So we have decided at this point, Jovan, to focus on the public education and the public engagement, and to get stakeholders like your newspaper and others to put out those encouraging and positive messages and to bring the Jamaican public along. And I am investing some hope and faith in that will work. However, Jovan, you will note as well that something is not mandatory if there are alternatives. So the government's policy will be arranged in such a way to encourage persons to take the vaccines, and you have an alternative if you don't. So if you want to come to school, and the science is clear on that if you're vaccinated, the spread is less likely, the teacher is safer, the student is safer, the household that you're going back home to might be safer. So vaccinated students should be able to come to face-to-face. But if you are not vaccinated, the same argument applies. It's the unvaccinated who are in the hospital seeking health care. It is the unvaccinated population that is the receptive host for the virus to mutate and survive. And so that's the reality. So we are not depriving any Jamaican of education, but there is a modality that if you are safe, then this is the modality you can access. If you are not, then access the other modality. And I think that is quite fair within the context of the public health threat that we face.
Thank you, Prime Minister. There are 4 more hands raised on Zoom. We'll take those 4 that I recognize. And 2, sir, there are some questions concerning students who have to either come in to the university, for example, for their stay, and those who have to fly out. I'm going to find that specific question for you, but then let's get to Mr. Roxroy McLean, who has a question. Roxroy?
Good evening, everyone. I have 3 questions for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Holness, 1, can you state if every member of your cabinet and of Parliament, that is MPs and senators, is vaccinated? 2, in regards to the no movement days, why not a straight 7-day lockdown? And 3, what's the projected economic fallout from these lockdown measures?
All right. I can't tell you if every minister is vaccinated. What I can say is that we made provision for all ministers to be vaccinated. And my last report is that all of them took advantage of it. But I couldn't say, I'm not saying definitively that they did. But that was my last unofficial report. For members of Parliament and senators, again, provisions were made for all members of Parliament and senators to be vaccinated. I cannot say definitively, and I did not receive a report. Now that you have asked, I will ask for a report. But remember now, vaccination is a private matter. So in other words, I should not go and look at anybody's vaccination record as it is stored. But I could ask for ministers coming into cabinet, show me your vaccination card. In other words, you can ask for it, but it shouldn't be that anyone else other than a health professional would be able to have access to the entirety of any group's vaccination record. But I will ask whether or not all members of Parliament are vaccinated and make a general encouragement for those who are not vaccinated. I would be surprised, however, if there is any large number of MPs who have not been vaccinated. There might be 1 or 2. The second question, you had 3 questions. So the vaccination question.
Yes.
And then
my second question, Mr. PM, would be in regards to
the 7-day lockdown.
The 7-day lockdown. Why not a straight 7-day lockdown?
Let me answer you this way. A 7-day lockdown is not inconceivable. We have never done it before, and we are always sensitive to the nature of our society where people live day to day and people have limited savings. So we have to be very careful about that. Not inconceivable, but we wouldn't do it just now. And then the economic cost, the PIOJ, I'm sure, will be coming out very soon with some new numbers. I'm certain they will probably be able to say something on the impact of these measures on the quarter's results that this would follow.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Again, a few questions on social media to get through, and we have 3 others on the Zoom platform. From social media, will care packages for the poor and vulnerable be made available on no movement days, as well as will private garbage companies be able to do garbage collection on no movement days?
Yes, it's there. Sanitation and public works, those are allowed to move ahead. The good question about the care packages. And when we use the term care package interchangeably, meaning the care program that is run by the Ministry of Finance, and then the care packages that are supported through the CDF and through the private initiative of the members of Parliament. I know that I certainly will be doing some, and I'm certain most MPs will be doing. We have not yet discussed an allocation for the CDF, but it is something that we will consider. As I said earlier, Minister Clark and myself have been discussing how we can target the support, increased support under our social safety net program.
Thank you, sir. And there's one that is brewing, and I want you to address it, because I believe those on social media are saying, well, Sunday worshipers are locked out of church, and yet Saturdays. The numbers for churchgoers on both days, sir, if you could reiterate that.
Yeah, it's, I'm trying my best to avoid this debate because, some people might believe, that I might have a certain bias or whatever, and that is absolutely not true. I try to be dispassionate in the exercise of my duties. The surprising thing, however, which I thought that there was only one side of the discourse, which is that the measures unfairly affect Sunday worshippers. But I'm surprised to hear that there are Sabbath worshippers who say the measures unfairly affect their business as well. So in both cases, there are issues. This is not one that I confess to that I'm able to resolve. Look, the churches have been very helpful and supportive, and I continue to encourage their support for the programs. And without their support, we wouldn't be able to be as successful as we are. These issues are valid, but I can't tell you I could adjust the measures to address them.
Thank you, sir. And let's go to Dashan Hendricks of the Jamaica Observer now. Dashan?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. Just two very quick questions. Increasingly, private sector companies are asking their workers to get vaccinated or take regular COVID tests at their expenses. What is the government considering that for public sector workers who are on the fence in taking the vaccine? And if yes, at whose cost will the government require public sector workers to take a regular test if they don't want to take the vaccine? And the second question is, you mentioned earlier in the preamble about having words with the finance minister about the hike in prices that are going on in terms of shipping costs over the world. And you mentioned that you are thinking about doing targeted intervention to assist vulnerable people. Can you just expound a bit more on that?
Thank you, Dashan. Let me say that we have not yet discussed a policy of requiring public sector workers to be tested in order to turn up to work. What I know we have started to do is to organize the various ministries, departments, and agencies and statutory bodies to receive vaccines. So I know the Ministry of Health is coordinating with the permanent secretaries and the heads of agencies to carry out a vaccination program within the public sector. Now, let me say this. Where we are with vaccination is that vaccination is not widespread. Once vaccination becomes widespread and widely available, then the cost of not being vaccinated should not be borne by the state. Let me repeat that. Yes, at this time, vaccines are not widely available, and it is not widespread. So you can't really impose fully the cost. The state shouldn't impose fully the cost on the citizen because it's not widely available yet. But once it becomes widely available and widely accessible, then the cost of not being vaccinated should not be borne by the state. And I want that to seep in. I know there are many questions that are going to come from that, but that is the government's policy. So, for example, if the employer is to say, well, if you're not vaccinated, for you to come into my workplace, you have to show that you're not going to infect the rest of my staff and derail my operation, so you have to show a test. you rightfully should not ask the employer to pay for that if vaccinations are available, if you have the option of getting vaccinated. Because technically, what would happen is that the government would be paying you not to get vaccinated. There are some tough decisions that we have to make, and you're not going to have everything the way you like it. But we have to look at what is in the best interests overall. So I hope I've answered your question there, Dashon. Now, as it relates to how the government intends to deliver care packages and support, meaning through the care program to the social safety net. In the past, the government would seek to say, let us say, okay, reduce certain taxes, reduce certain duties. The problem with that, and we hear the conversation about reducing the taxes, is that what you end up doing is giving a benefit through a private entity without any guarantee that the reduction in the tax or the duty or whatever will be passed on. You have a lot of leakages that you open up when you do that as well. Because all of a sudden, goods that do not benefit from the reduction in the duties will start to parade as those goods. And we have seen that happen quite a bit. And so you end up losing a lot of revenue. So that's not a good way of saying you're doing something to the benefit of the poor. The poor is not that concept. It's not just some, nondescript group lumped together. They are individuals in the society, individual persons. And we do the poor, in quotes, an injustice when we just lump everybody together and say, we're putting aside this amount of money for the poor. Those days are behind us. What we're trying to do, Deshaun, is to build a society where we respect those persons who are vulnerable, who don't have the level of income to give them access to the level of consumption, that we are able to identify them specifically and give them the benefit specifically. And that's what we need to do, which is why we are trying to build a national identification system. There are some people who would say, why not reduce the GCT? The GCT making everything expensive. If I reduce the GCT, I reduce it for everybody. So people who can afford it would get the benefit just as though the person who can't afford it. So our strategy is to do what we have done using, for example, the care program. If you meet a certain criteria, you sign up with your TRN and your bank account number, and we transfer the cash to you directly. So someone who don't need it don't get it. So more people who need it gets it. You notice nobody can complain that some person who don't need the care program got it. That's a revolution in how government has provided social support and safety net in a time of crisis. So whatever increase in revenue the government would have made by virtue of the increases in ad valorem charges and duties and so forth will be given to the poor, but it will go directly in cash transfers to the poor as we have set the criteria and identified them. And we are reaching that point of sophistication, though there were attempts to prevent it. But we are reaching that point of sophistication where we will be able to give direct support to persons in our society, respectfully, who are considered to be poor in the sense that they don't have the level of income to guarantee them a certain level of consumption.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Someone who is new to this platform in terms of asking questions, Mr. Keon Reyna is next. Ahead of Keon, let me ask from social media, the issue of transportation on no movement days for those who need to do the vaccinations and essential workers.
Right. The way in which the order is written is that the person who is transporting is covered. So once you are in the vehicle and the person you are transporting is going for a vaccine and they can prove that, then the driver is covered.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Keon?
Thank you, Naomi. Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Now, I know the question was asked earlier about the Reggae Boys match that's set for just over 2 weeks away. What consideration was given to that and the test match, which bowls off tomorrow at Sabina Park between the West Indies and Pakistan, which fall within the 7 days that you've given as non-movement days?
Well, for the sporting matches that we have allowed, there are no spectators. That's my distinct recollection. So those will be able to go on, and whatever exemptions would be needed. I leave that up to the minister who is here. They've got the exemptions already. So we'll make whatever special exemptions would be necessary. But my distinct recollection is that there would be no spectator events anyway.
Thank you, sir. And our final question, Keon?
Yes, just a follow-up question to one that would have been asked by Corey earlier about, is there any plans to restrict flights coming in given the numbers of the variant would be coming? Yes.
So, if you notice, we only do these restrictions when we establish that the variant strain is not here. Once it is here, then it really doesn't make any sense. We do sometimes do it for other reasons, but we have not looked at in this go-round of measures any changes to the border measures that are in place. In the next go-round, there may be some changes.
Thank you, sir. Our final question then, Ms. Jamila Maitland. Jamila? Ms. Maitland, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jamila.
Good night, everyone. Jamila here. My question is in relation to border, but it's more specific to unvaccinated non-nationals. I wanted to find out if there was any discussion on the cabinet level about people abroad, foreigners who are unvaccinated. And two, my question is for the CMO now. I want to find out, based on the statistics that you have, what health facilities right now, if Jamaicans would want to go there, it's a field hospital. You have to go if they have issues with COVID or COVID complications. So I'm asking what field hospitals right now are being commissioned, because the capacity inside the physical hospital, it's full.
All right, I'm asking Minister Tufton to answer that. As it relates to borders and requiring visitors to be vaccinated, for air travel, we have not had that conversation just yet. We have had that conversation as it relates to cruise, and I believe, my recollection is that that is a requirement. No, not a requirement yet, but generally most crews have themselves imposed that. So no, we have not had the specific discussion at Cabinet, but I'm certain that it will come up through the recommendations if the Ministry of Health sees it as necessary. I'll ask Minister Tufton to just explain what provisions are being made for additional bed space.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So I had announced in my presentation that we have 2 additional field hospitals that we're going to be putting in place, one in Maypen, Clarendon, Maypen Hospital, and the other in Savlamar, Westmoreland. Both are 40-bed capacity each, and they are to be installed as quickly as possible.
All right, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Prime Minister. Again, I believe if we could just reiterate the no movement days and what will happen this weekend leading into the first no movement period with the longer hours?
So, to ensure that we break the transmission cycle that is taking place now, on the recommendations of the Ministry of Health and after discussion at Cabinet today, we have approved 7 no-movement days. These days mean that the entire day will be under a curfew, and only persons who are exempted under the gazetted DRMA order, which will be online shortly, and we will have my script of the measures posted on our relevant social media so you can follow them. But just to remind our listeners and viewers and followers that the 7 no-movement days would be August the 22nd, that is Sunday coming, Monday, August the 23rd, Tuesday, August the 24th, and those are 3 days running together, so that's a block of no-movement days. And then Sunday, the 29th of August, Monday, the 30th of August, and then Tuesday, the 31st of August. Again, another 3 days running together. And then Sunday, the 5th of September. So those are the no movement days. And we ask Jamaicans to comply. Don't move if you don't have to. Stay at home and work from home during those days. These are not public holidays. Work remotely if you can, do something productive. There are some businesses that are allowed to operate essential services and others, which again are listed and will be published and circulated. Persons would have legitimate reasons to move if they are exempt. So they would be given a specific letter, some of them, or by virtue of the position and job they hold, which they can prove by their ID, but they are only able to move in pursuit of the exemption. They're not allowed to move at large. Persons are allowed to move for vaccination or medical related, but again, they have to be moving specifically for that. They can't be moving at large. If persons are traveling, meaning that they are leaving the island or coming into the island, they are allowed to move from the point of entry or exit into the island to their place of abode, not stopping anywhere or going anywhere or visiting other than where they are going to their final destination. So those are covered. Pharmacies and ATM machines and so forth. And if a remittance agent is inclined to do so, they are not compelled to. They can, just to ensure that people are able to buy medicine, buy their pharmaceutical items, pay for their test if they have to. Yes, so those are the establishments which are allowed during the no movement hours. Recall, however, that we do have the ENDS program, which is a well thought out and a strategy that has worked very well. And we encourage persons to use the ENDS programs to order your food, order your groceries and so forth. And they are allowed to move during the curfew hours, a well-established system there, and that works. So I want to thank everyone for listening and to again make my usual encouragement to all Jamaicans: get vaccinated.